All right, so this is Steve. He's going to talk about future-proofing function APIs with the REST parameter.
Yes, this talk was something I dreamed up because I saw Joe was looking for people to talk tonight. So this actually came with something I ran into personally. This was just Sunday. So this is a little sketchy. It's my first time using this REPL-IT.it website. It's kind of nice. It does Node and other environments. So I just did everything right in here with comments. So can you guys see that okay? Yeah. Cool. So that's me and where to get a hold of me. Who am I? I've been doing software since the 90s, a long time. Started out C, C++, client server doing factory automation, monitoring, and then high frequency trading for a while. So that was a lot of fun. And since I guess 2007, I've been doing full stack-ish, mostly back-end, Python and JavaScript stuff. And lately I'm working Vue.js and Angular and Ionic, at least on the JavaScript side. So I've given some presentations before, and I'm happy to announce that my Ionic project is finally freaking shipping. So there we are. Ionic and the beauty of Ionic, both platforms, one code base. So that's my plug for Ionic.
No, move to React Native.
Yeah, no,
there's always one guy, right?
There's always one. There's always one. But what I found out as I was making my next release of the software is I ran into like a problem that I coded into my first release of the software. Funny how that works, right? Excuse me. So what I came up with was, since it's a mobile app, it may be installed on their phone, right? And they've got version 1, let's call it. And I released version 2, and maybe they're using the PWA version of my app. And they all write to the same API, or they all write to like a Mongo database or something. So what if I add new attributes in version 2? They get written by the version 2 app into the database. They come along in the version 1 app still on their phone because they didn't upgrade. And they edit that same object. It doesn't know anything about the new attributes that could have possibly been added to that object in version 2, and they're magically gone. And I was like, oh crud, this is not a good situation. So then I thought about it for a while, and that's what this talk is about. So let's do a simplified version of the problem I talked about is the to-do app, right? You can't do a presentation unless you do it about the to-do app. So if we have an API that returns to-do objects that look like this, they have 3 fields to make it simple, right? You've got some kind of database ID, you've got the to-do thing you want to do, and whether you've completed or not, a little Boolean, right? So you can imagine, my first version of a class that constructed these look like this, right? It takes, oops, let me get the cursor out of the way. It takes an object that has 3 attributes, and it stores them explicitly into 3 values. Right, so you could imagine the JSON API comes in, new, build up a list of these guys, show them in a pretty screen, you edit, and then you save back to the JSON API, right? So if we run this and we create a new V1 with my to-do object, here's what we get, right? It's a V1 and there's its 3 fields. No big surprise, I hope. So then, say Steve comes along and in version 2, I'm like, oh, what would be a cool feature is if I could keep track of the date you created it, and maybe you could order them by which is your oldest to do, so you can finally, clean out the back bedroom or whatever your oldest task is. Clean the garage, right? Whatever it is.
Backlog.
So I have my original 3 fields and maybe an optional one. I could set a date, or I'll wump up a date if you don't supply one, right? So if I create a V2 and log it out, you say, hey, V2, yeah, it's got a little date object sitting on there. Life is good. Go deploy my app, and then my problem finally occurs, where I say, well, I'm on the V1 app, and I get a V2 instance, and I construct it. What does it look like, right? In V2 world, what does a V2 object look like? Well, it's not a very pretty picture. It turns out V1 guys still look like V1 guys, so I've lost my created date. Right? So I'm on my old phone, I load the data, I'm like, oh crud. I've lost the date. So if I go back to V2, all of a sudden nothing has dates on it. I'd be like, what's going wrong? So this is the problem I want to solve, right? Oh, I even have a big oops here, right? So created property values are lost, blah, blah, blah. Same thing I just said. Let me comment out some of this stuff. So we don't have to look at this yet. We don't have to keep looking at it. So I'm going to kind of digress and say, well, what are some of the JavaScript features we might use that would help us What are some of the JavaScript features we could use that would make this a little easier?
If you had a variable number of arguments, would that help?
Well, we could do that. Wouldn't that be a thing? That might be a thing you could use, right? Does JavaScript have that? But before we do that, let's look at ... the spread syntax, right? The spread syntax is some you didn't cover, I'm happy to say, in your presentation, because I knew he was talking about functions. That's what made me think about this. So we can go and see what the spread syntax looks like, right? And here's the MDN. Don't go to W3 schools ever again in your life. MDN should be the top of the search results nowadays. So, and they tell you all about it. But basically, it's the notion that you could say you can take an array or an object and kind of split it apart into its pieces and turn an array into its individual elements by doing ... in front of it. So let's look at that in action. So you might define I just stole this right out of the MDN example. You might have a sum function that takes 3 arguments, and you could have an array of 3 numbers. And if you wanted to call sum, if you didn't know about spread, you would do numbers.0, numbers.1, numbers.2, pass them into the function, it would sum them up. Or you can use the nifty spread operator, pass them into the sum function, and they both give you the same result back, which is 6. Okay, math still works. Okay, another nice feature of spread is it lets you do concatenation real easily. So you can say, hey, take this array, split it into its pieces, and put it into a new array. So here I'm making a new array. I'm saying, hey, take my guy numbers, split it into the 1, 2, and 3. Do it again just for fun, and then we'll log it out. And sure enough, here I get an array of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And the original numbers guy is not destroyed in any way. He's still our cool 3-person array, right? That's all good. And the thing that I hadn't really seen this discussed very often, but it makes perfect sense. It also works for object properties too, right? Most people, when they think about the spread operator, they're usually talking about lists. List. Make more lists, copy lists, blah, blah, blah. Well, you can do the same thing to copy an object. You can say, hey, split it into its attribute value pairs, put them into a new object, and you can even add some more. Tack some more attribute values onto there. So here's our original 1, 2, 3 plus A3, and then our original guy has still got the same attributes he had before. Life makes sense. So that's a nice feature. And you'll find you use this, especially if you're using any of the popular front-end frameworks. Most of them figure out what's changed on the screen by saying, did this object change? And if you have a list of something, say you're like our list of to-dos, how would Angular or how would React figure out that it changed? You can't just update the individual values of the list usually, because the way the framework works is it looks to see if the overall object has changed. So you're forever doing this kind of syntax where you're taking a list you have, destructuring it, lumping it into a new array, just so change detection can figure out, oh, everything's changed. And that's how the screen updates. So that's where, and especially most people using whichever ES this is, 6 probably. I'm looking at the guys who know 8.
ES 8.
Spread is 8?
Oh, spread? No. I think spread was ES 7.
I don't know, but we're on ES 2018.
That's right. They changed it to years.
So
array spread was 2015.
okay.
I think object spread was just last year.
Oh, okay. But anywho,
No. I mean, it's still a Babel plugin, right? Well, it has to be. It has to be.
if you have to go
No,
back
that's
to
fine.
2015.
Just working all your life is over the summer.
I shouldn't have asked. I shouldn't have asked. Because I don't use the ES number thing because they don't make any sense to me. There, I said it. It's going to be on tape forever.
What Babel plugins are available is really.
I just use some CLI toolchain that's all pre-wired, and it gives me JavaScript that works. That's how I do it. Okay, so what if we could use the REST parameters? That's another ... thing that JavaScript has. And what are REST parameters, right? The notion with a REST parameter is give me the rest of the stuff. So you can so what we just talked about was how can I take an array or an object, do something to it and hand it to a function or to another variable. But what if you want, the other use of ... is in this REST parameter style where it's in the function definition or declaration, where you say, hey, collect up all the arguments, however many there are, and put them into an array called the args in this example here. So I can call this function with 3 arguments or 4 arguments, and they're all just going to be passed into, they're going to get collected up and put in this whatever argument you call. So I have a better example, I think. So if I have a function here, just like that very one we saw, that takes a bunch of arguments, is any number of arguments. I can pass in 4 arguments. I'll log out what those are, and then we'll get the sum of them. So the args, when you come into this function, is automatically 1, 2, 3, 4. However many arguments I pass in, they get, let's say that's small. Right? Grind. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right. So they're all just going to get collected up into there. You could even do stuff like add additional arguments ahead of it. Right. So here, args is now 2, 3, 4, 5 because A took the 1. Make sense? Here we go. I'll show you. So what's A? A is 1. Right. So we're calling the function rest sum with 5 parameters. The first parameter ends up in A. That's 1. The last 4 all get scooped up by the ... and they're thrown into the args. Right? So that's how REST args works. It gets the rest of the arguments. That's why it's called REST args. Lots of languages have this. So same thing, right? We can do this more and more, right? So now A is 1, B is 2, and the args is a list of 3, 4, and 5. It's the rest. That's all you have to do. You'll never forget it now. It's the rest. That's all you have to know. Okay, so it turns out, thankfully, this also works for properties. So with, let me comment out this so we don't get too much output. So I can also define and say, hey, I'm taking an object, that's what the curly braces are, and say collect up all the properties and their values, put them into the args. I'm going to log those out, and I'll call it 2 different times. First, I'll call it with x1, y2, z3, and then, so it doesn't matter what the properties are called. It's just going to scoop them all up and dump them into the args. So let's do that. So the args, the first time I call it, it gets the full object, as we would expect, right? And then the rest, it gets all the rest. So that's how that works. And then what this function is actually doing is it says, hey, object values says, just pluck off the values instead of the properties. So it's just going to rip down and take all of it. I don't care what the key is called, get the value. So the key is, the first time is X, it says, just give me 1. The key is Y, don't care what it's called, give me 2, and so on. It rips off all those values, makes them into an array, and then does the math to sum them up. So this could be a for loop, for example, versus instead of using the fancy objects.
My mouth was shut there, but look at that.
Because this way I don't have to do math, right? Because computer people are all about not wanting to do math. At least I am. We're all lazy in some way. I don't have to do length minus 1 and all that stuff. It's just going to iterate all over them, and the goodness happens. So, well, what do you know? So we've seen we can do this rest and be flexible and say, hey, I can take any number of arguments if it's an array or if it's an object. Those are the things we care about when you call functions, right? Pretty much branch everything. But wait, isn't there this thing called arguments, which we saw, which should let me handle a variable number of arguments. And we saw in the previous presentation, it's definitely a thing you can do, right? So unfortunately, arguments are only array-like, or as I called them, array-light. So it turns out they don't implement any of the fancy methods. They only really support length and operator indexing, I believe.
And then if you want
So
them to
you
be,
can't do.
if you want them to be like an argument, you have to use like apply.
You have to use those functions
like
that
apply,
I never
turn it into a.
I don't use
It would
any.
be great to see that.
But we're not going to do that because we don't care about arguments. I'm only talking about arguments so you know they exist. You don't want to use them. Because if you go to the MDN, what it tells you is, it's an array-like object, accessible inside functions. Note, if you're writing ES6 compatible, then REST parameters should be preferred. Yes, just use REST parameters because they're real arrays. They're real objects. They do the
You
right
should
thing.
prefer.
These are lame in many different ways, is the problem with them. What it turns out is, I found out in Node and in Chrome, so here, I'm telling the story from the inside out, not from the top to the bottom. So I expected arguments here to be a list, right? So I can say arguments, right? There's no parameters at all. Every JavaScript function just magically has arguments, right? So I can list them out. I can get their length. I can go and say, hey, give me index 0 of this guy. What's it look like, right? And then I can call reduce on them because it should be an array, right? It should just work. Wah, no, because it's not really an array. But what it turns out it is it's a freaking object, at least in Node. So it does mean my previous implementation that I did for sums across objects. Ooh, I've broken the world apparently. Maybe REPL is broken.
I so want this to work.
There we go. So it actually works if you treat it like an object. So arguments has a length, so it's an array. So moral of the story? Don't. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. It was what we had back when we only had sharp sticks. But we have things that are better than sharp sticks now, so you don't have to use it.
Sharper sticks.
Sharper sticks. So remember the problem I had that started this whole thing off? Let's see if we can fix it, right? So let's bring back our pals' original problem, right? Here's our original original to do. Here's the v2 constructor. I'm gonna make a guy called next, which is a v1 constructed into a v2, right? So it's a v2 object. So what if I wrote what if I had been smart and wrote my original v1 like this, right? If I said, okay, I bet in the future I will add more properties to this object. Like how long have I been developing software and I just thought of that? Just saying. Okay, right, so I got these three and I said, yes, I could use this variable arguments rest thing here because I want the rest. And so I just come in, we get them all. I'm going to log out what rest is, and we use our pal object assign, which says, hey, take all these properties and just smash them onto this pointer, with this reference, and we'll get it. So let's see what that looks like. So how do I invoke it? I make a new dude with a new v1 with the v2 guy, and we log some stuff. So sure enough, the first thing I'm logging here is rest, and rest is an object that has this key I never knew about in v1 time called created, and it's got a value which is a date. v1, if I'd written v1 like this in the first place, he would be totally flexible to handle any new properties I add on to v2, right? I can add as many as I want, and then you can see when I do the object assign of this of rest onto this, they end up in my improved v2. There's my created right there. It gets added onto my object. So I can, add, right? So we can see now there's foo and bar is on there. and sure enough, foo and bar gets added on. So I could go to V3, V4, V5, add as many properties as I want. Now, granted, V1 won't be able to do anything smart with them, but at least he's not going to mess me up by like whacking him when he goes disabled, right? So as long as I think this is a good way to think about, here it happens to be an object, but it could be an array, right? It could just be a function, a regular old plain function. And as long as you have this situation where you may have old code running against new APIs or a new database design or whatever it is, you can add this on in appropriate places and protect yourself for future changes. And that's all there is to it. That's all I got.
So I'm curious, so I use this exact same pattern all the time, but I find that I'm using REST in a place where like the body of my function doesn't necessarily care about that stuff. It's some other function that I'm passing it to, like that's going to be called in the body of the function, and then I just pass it REST. But whenever I add something to what is now called REST that I'm actually going to need to work with in the body of the function, I end up adding it to the arguments. Like technically your arguments there could just be REST. And then object
I'm
assign
not sure
this.
I understand.
So, I mean, I thought my mouth was shut. I don't understand either.
So technically
what Joe
it could
is
be
saying
REST.
is I could have written it, the whole thing, right?
Yep.
Like this, except explicit is better than implicit.
I agree. So every time
hence
you
I would not do that. But
every
this is
time
the
you
most
add a new
flexible.
argument, are you adding that argument before REST and just have REST there as a fallback just in case? Okay.
Well,
Because it should just be a fault. It should just be the things I didn't think about.
my devil's advocate character is, why don't you use what the other speaker presented, which avoids using any of that?
No, it doesn't, because if you don't know the length of it, it's not an array. So if you don't know like in his example, which was awesome, he had argument 0, argument 1, argument 2, done. But what if now there's 6 arguments?
Well, isn't the array actually?
Arguments is array-like. You could probably do array from nowadays. I don't know.
I've lost.
Your reduce was, or as object values, blew my mind. It's like, man, I've been writing this wrong for 20 years.
It's a little
Well, I
upsetting.
got another one that actually is gonna go into the heart of the atomic nature of your data, meaning that just like you pointed out, I mean, it's basically just a dump, carry over, copy type of operation. But if the data is dependent upon something else, then pretty much you're gonna get destroyed one way or the other, because even though you have the data, then the data now makes no sense. So the question is, how much value that actually...
It depends, right? It depends in that scenario, right? Yes, it's not like free, and there's nothing free, right? So in this case, I have to, if I'm really thinking through this, I have to make sure all the paths through the code don't ever chop stuff off, right? I have to be aware that there could be more arguments, and that may make other functions have to change. It's kind of nice in an object-oriented kind of way, because you're usually pretty safe, right? I think it probably would be harder in a functional world. I'd have to think about it. I haven't at all. But in an object world, it's just some extra properties that are passed along with my object, right? As long as when I go to save it somewhere or transport it, I pass along all. I don't cherry pick out attributes or properties. I should be safe.
Well, so my question would be, why not something that actually would be always guaranteed to be safe, which means you've got an API which recognizes that a call came from a different version.
Sure.
And basically that API causes the object to
Right.
be returned only if it is compatible. If it's not
Right.
compatible, they basically say,
How
well,
many
listen, the data
developers
is
do you
there,
have?
you just can't use it. And
Right.
would that be safe? Guaranteed?
There's
Guaranteed
also
safe, but okay, I'm a sole proprietor for my application. Am I gonna stand up 2 servers, V1 and V2, and V3 and V4? Because I want to iterate fast. I want a version like every month, pretty much. I have a long feature backlog. I don't want to have to write and stand up all those servers for all those versions on the off chance that you are still on version 1 and you're on version 3, but I'm on version 15. I'm like, I could do that, and I could have that each of those API layers do the right thing.
But that was not my suggestion. My suggestion was you identify the caller with a version, then the API basically recognizes it and say, okay, you are not compatible, so I'm gonna give you a warning saying, okay, listen, you wanna proceed? Upgrade. You don't have to stand up and remove the version.
I could do that.
In
And
Russia,
again,
application
Jonathan
upgrades
said-
you.
People love running applications though.
This is in no way is this over-engineering. In no way is this over-engineering.
Absolutely, by definition.
No, I really don't think it is.
No, and you know what?
It's
Like
a couple
like,
extra
you're-
parameters on
You're
a few
looking at it
methods.
like in a very simple example of how it works. Imagine like REST was a series of functions. Maybe his first argument was a value, and then whatever comes after that is an array of functions that you pass in, and now the function's called transform. You give me an initial value, and then you tell me each function you want to run on that value, and then I run the result of that function and pass it to the next function, like a currying. You know what I mean?
But you
So
changed
REST.
context. He was talking about the APIs.
Well, no, I'm just saying, like, you're looking at it in a very simple example where he's just building an object and saying, like, if there's extra shit to put on the object, put it on the object. Clearly, I wrote the code, I intended it to be there. But I'm saying there's a certain amount of composability that comes from this. It lets you write some pretty powerful helper functions, if anything.
But I'm not disputing the power of the functionality of the language. I'm just saying that application of that functionality in the context and only in the context of APIs, not in the context of, say, frameworks. I understand that the frameworks have to sometimes basically change reality. Okay, they basically don't present everything, and they have to basically resort to this quantum mechanics. So basically, you've got some things which are declared, and then you've got the rest, and then the rest became something that actually is declared, and then again it goes into the rest. So to me, that's quantum mechanics. It works. I understand that. Sometimes this is the best way to do it. But when it comes to APIs, that was his initial problem. APIs should be basically, not allow you to screw things up.
But wouldn't
Well,
it depend on
that's
the
why he's
consumer?
future-proofing it.
Right, the consumer of the API matters too, right? If it's your own app and it's your API, I don't know if it's a public API or not, but if you know what you're dealing with, I see where you're coming from, because we've had to version APIs. If I have X number of clients of different vendors or whatever consuming it, then yeah, maybe I need something a little more sophisticated. But when it's like something just, my app, I know I'm probably gonna add
You're
more
the only
fields
one
here.
touching it.
Yeah, exactly. Then I can see, again, like Steve said, it depends.
This also assumes it's a REST API, right? So if it's something like GraphQL, where it's literally a layer in front of your APIs, then your concern kind of goes away. I mean, it's one of the points of something like GraphQL is like a gateway in front that's going to catch. So Steve could have, he just upgrades something on the back end or updates his GraphQL schema and then changes how he handles it in the back end and it's fine. That's one of the problems with REST, right? Because then often your callers are very tightly coupled to what the actual back end is. So.
And in my defense, it isn't a REST API. It's a raw database API. Right? So it's just a JSON API. Just like, here's some JSON. It's like, saved. That's all. So they're all just writing pretty much direct into a database store, JSON store.
My real question is, what do you have against semicolons, and do you also hate babies?
It's because this project I'm on is Vue, and the guy who set it up is it set up to script semi. So I don't have to recommend
That's
it.
awful.
My workplace doesn't.
I like it. I really like it now.
Really?
I never thought I would
My
like it.
workplace doesn't use semicolons too. You get used to it. It's mostly just.
Okay, any non-hater questions?
Nope.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks for
Hey, Steve. Steve, I was going to say, you didn't actually cover those next two lines where you were spreading one object into another.
Oh, these two here?
Well,
can't see
you
him.
disconnected from the screen.
We have this technology. No, good point. Thank you, Joe. I forgot all about that.
Yeah,
'Cause it
that's
doesn't work.
that gets used constantly.
No, how does that work? It didn't work for me. Tell me what.
That didn't work. Well,
This doesn't work.
wait,
So-
that doesn't.
Here, let me get rid of this. Was that what you're going to talk about?
I wasn't going to talk about
No,
it. You
I'm
had
not.
it in
The
your
second
code.
way I see it is, I would expect you to say,
Yeah, I just you don't need the destructure
add
of
on
this.
the rest and
You
assign
just
it to this.
you don't need.
That will merge though.
It
you
doesn't
don't-
work. Though.
I don't think you need to destructure this though. And now this
What if you
equals.
just say this?
You can't assign it.
Yeah, what if if you assign that to a variable? Let's not call it this for a second.
Okay, well that'll work.
So, yeah, something equals, but I don't think you need to spread this, do you?
Well, yeah, because I don't. If I just assign the spread of rest to this,
Oh, record this.
I'll whack
Click
it.
on the thing.
Without context, here's my demo.
So we'll back up for demo purposes. So we had this,
Undo.
and it worked fine. And now we're saying, well, can't we
And Joe said break it.
do?
He had it there in the comments.
He was thinking out loud and he forgot to delete it.
No. I wanted to talk about, but I didn't want to go too long. And so I would like to say I could do this, and we get this error that
This
says you can't
equals-
assign to this. So then Joe started down this path here. Just want to be difficult now. So foo. Here, let's make this easier. Where's foo? Foo.
There it is. Yeah.
So, oh right, so it's everything, right? Because if I
Yeah,
did,
it's this plus the rest.
Okay.
that's what we expect it to be. So my only question was, right? So that's just the rest. So why doesn't you just can't assign to this? Is really the moral of the story.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So,
I don't know. This
and it looks
equals
like
spread this into some other thing. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but if the,
it's
this is
probably
the
pretty
context,
evil to do that.
how can you
Because I've broken all the
change the
probably all the
context within
prototypal
itself?
functions are
Well, in the constructor, this at this point is it's
Yeah,
just
it's
an
not even-
object, so you're just
I thought it
adding.
was just an object, but I was wrong.
If you do it in a function, does it work? This equals.
Inside a regular function, not a
Yeah.
constructor.
Outside of
No, I mean the way to do it is just iterate over rest. Just say this dot whatever rest equals.
Yes.
You know, you say rest for each. This element equals
Yes.
the element in rest.
But it's
But you
not-
raise a good point. But I think your
But
problem
it's-
is this. The problem is
the
you're
problem is
assigning it
this.
to this.
It's definitely this.
It's not that.
Okay. I'll be beating this horse now. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Cool. Thank you, Steve.